All right, let's start Unit 3. Let's talk a little bit about the Protestant Reformation. For many of you that in any history class, it's a little bit familiar or unfamiliar to you. It's a completely different thing that usually gets skipped by in most classes. Most of the time, you learn a little bit about it in English class because of all the writings that come from it. But the Protestant Reformation, think of that root word protest. It's just a group of Christians that protest the Catholic Church. And let's talk about why. So when we end Unit 2, we have a new invention from Johann Gutenberg, which is the printing press. Why is the printing press important? Before, there might have been one Bible per town. All of a sudden, we go to everybody can have a Bible. Bibles still take days to print, but before they had to be handwritten in a monastery. Okay, a monk had to sit down and write it. It would take months for another Bible to be produced, so it's not possible for you to take one home and read for yourself. When you're able to take that Bible home and read for yourself, you're able to think for yourself. And that brings in secularism, that separation of church and state. Maybe I have some aspect or power in what happens. Individualism. Not only does the human have power, maybe I have power to decide what happens, or I have consequences based on what I do. And eventually we're going to lead to religious tolerance after the end of the Protestant Reformation. Because the big thing is, after the result of the Reformation is going to be the Bible printed in multiple languages. Before, in a church, you had to read it, or it had to be read to you in Latin. And it was more ceremonial than teaching of the Bible. Okay, we didn't teach the lessons, the morality. We taught ritual. And the church did that, and that's something that has a big factor on the ideas of the church. So there's some problems that lead to the Protestant Reformation. Let's talk a little bit about them. So the first thing is merchant wealth challenged the church's view of usury. Usury is just the same as getting a loan today. So when you get a loan for $1,000, do you have to pay $1,000 back? Absolutely not. You have to pay back what's known as an interest rate. Remember, in the Bible, Jesus talks to give with a loving and giving heart. You don't expect to receive money back. You give in a way that is charitable. The church doesn't do this. Usury is a super high interest rate to borrow from the church, and the church is our government system at this point in the Dark Ages over here in Europe. So it would be over a 10% interest rate. I could give you an exact number by looking at it, but it's a super high interest rate. I mean, a house interest rate, anything over 4% is high. So you're paying over a 10% rate. And most of the time, people can't pay these back. So they get in a lot of debt to the church. Another thing is, where do you guys think that most leaders of the church came from? Well, we talked about the Renaissance. Where does it take place? It takes place right here in Italy, the boot state. Okay, we talked about it. The Bible's in Latin. You know where people still can read and write a little bit of Latin? Italy. If you're a very good Christian monk or cardinal and work your way up in England or in France or in Spain or in Germany, guess what? You still can't be the Pope. The Pope is always chosen eternally by a group of eternal Italian, that's a phrase, of cardinals. So no matter what, they're going to choose amongst themselves. So it's always going to be an Italian, and that really ticks off those that are actually good Christians that would be really good popes that would do the right thing. The church has great political power. They decide elections. They decide, or they can exile or excommunicate a king. Excommunication means when I die, I go to hell because the Pope condemned me to that. Of course, we don't do that anymore or believe that anymore. But the Pope had much more power than a king or queen. And anyone that questioned him could be exiled, meaning people are not allowed to trade with you or talk to you or communicate with you. That is an automatic death sentence for them as well. They'll get exiled or excommunicated. And they also can charge you with heresy, and the crime of heresy will get you burned at the stake, okay? They'll light a pyre, they'll put you on it and burn you alive. So you don't really want to mess with the church. The church is also wealthy. We talk in the Bible, you guys should be familiar or a little bit familiar, if you were raised in church, about many stories in the Bible talking about the negatives of wealth. It's easier to go through the eye of a needle than to get to heaven as a wealthy man, or for a camel to get through the eye of a needle. It is not meaning it's possible, but it's very, very, very challenging to get to heaven unless you give in a loving and giveful way. You look at the Catholic Church today, Vatican City, that little dot there, they have over $4 billion in wealth that is listed. There's countless money we don't know about, and that's not probably including things like assets like Catholic churches all around the world. That is money and gold and liquid assets right here in the Vatican. The big thing is an indulgence. Think of an indulgence as a get out of hell free card. Okay, so to indulge is to take part of or to do something in excess. And in this case, an indulgence means sin. Okay, so in indulgence, I can live my life terribly. I can go see prostitutes. I can gamble. I can cuss. I can use the Lord's name in vain. I can have false idols. I can steal. I can kill. At the end of my life or whenever I'm ready, I can buy an indulgence, which is pretty much a get out of hell free card. Okay, and if my dad was a terrible person, if my grandma was a terrible person, I can buy an indulgence that is going to save them from hell. So they're in hell suffering. The minute I buy it, they go to paradise. The Bible never teaches this. And the Catholic Church, since people can't read, tell people that this is true. If the Catholic Church or the establishment wants to say, as we go into church, you have to give $5 to the priest to hear the sermon or you have to leave. Well, everybody's going to do that because they think the Bible said that, because their preacher will tell them that. And no one's going to question that. If you question it, you're going to be exiled or excommunicated. It's a straight ticket to hell. You do not want to mess with the Pope or the established church. The church is like a mafia, okay? You do not mess with them. Let's see here. So our main key player is going to be a little guy by the name of Martin Luther, and he's going to be in Germany as a monk in the Church of Wittenberg. He is initially wanting to be a lawyer, but he is going to become a monk because the story goes that he was almost hit by lightning, and he was so scared, he said, since God saved him, he was going to give his life to the church. So when he becomes a monk, he becomes a very devout monk, and he is going to see problems like indulgences. He's going to take a trip to Rome, and he's going to see how bad the Catholic clergy treat the actual peasants of this time period. So when he gets back from his trip to Rome, he is going to go to the church in Wittenberg and write up the 95 Theses. And the 95 Theses are going to be 95 problems he has with the church. He is very careful about this, though, and he doesn't want to get rid of the church. He wants to fix the church as a monk. He doesn't see it as an option. There were two guys before him that tried fixing the church, and it didn't end up so well for them. So the guys are going to be John Wycliffe, and he's going to speak about the church, and he says he wants a Bible in German. The Bible not being written in Latin is a big no-no. Like today, you cannot have a Quran and practice religion if it's not in Arabic. You have to learn Arabic. So he is going to be burned at the stake. Another guy, Jan Hus, is going to have that same idea. We really need a Bible in German, English, and French so people can read and interpret for themselves. The church doesn't want them to interpret the Bible for themselves, also has him burned at the stake. So Martin Luther is our third player. He says, I'm fine with the Catholic Church. I've been a part of it for years. I want to fix the church. And in his 95 Theses, he mostly comes up with ideas of how to fix the church in regards to indulgences. And he comes up with his own idea and inadvertently makes his own religion from it. Let's see if I can find a good list of them. Struggling to find a list here. But not only does he have one complaint of the church, he has 95. Hammering it in the door of the church is a big deal because that's where people read their news that could read. I mean, it's like 1 in 1,000 people can read. Of course, there's no school back then. The church teaches you what they want to teach you if you're in an orphanage. But it's things like indulgences. It's having the church always be an Italian. It's things that, like having a lot of wealth, that he complains about. And he goes up to the church and he says, man, this is really what I want to fix. And with these 95 reasons, the church gets terrified. They're going to call him into the Diet of Worms. And the Diet of Worms, he is going to be seen by Charles V, which is the Holy Roman Emperor. We currently do not have Germany in class. The Holy Roman Emperor is going to be the ruler, and that's Charles V. And he is best friends with Pope Leo X, the current pope. He's going to go on trial, and he is going to escape this trial without being killed. He's going to be called again, and he's not going to go. He's going to go hide with some priests in the Holy Roman Empire, or some princes that are trying to defy Charles V. So he is going to be on the run, and he makes the Lutheran Church. If you look at a Lutheran church today, it is the same exact thing as a Christian or a Catholic church. The only difference is that they do not have a pope, okay? The only difference between a Catholic and Lutheran church, they have the same ceremonies, rituals. They do not agree with the Pope. Also, monks can get married, which is something Martin Luther wanted to do. He said that monks should be able to get married and have children that can be more followers of God. With Martin Luther, he says that you can get salvation by faith alone. Here's a picture of Martin Luther. Let's pull him up. Meaning, long as you believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord and Son of God, then you can get to heaven. The Catholic Church says you have to be charitable. You have to give. You have to take care and volunteer. He says salvation by faith alone is all you can get, or all you need to get to heaven. He also says the Bible is the ultimate authority. He says it is the only thing on this earth that tells us about Christianity. The Catholic Church, what do they say? They say that the Pope and the Bible are equal. Anything the Pope says, like, hey, indulgences are okay, it's equal to the Bible. You better listen to what he has to say. And that's where that corruption comes from. That's how they get richer and richer and richer and richer. So he's going to create the birth of the Protestant church by trying to fix these issues. Of course, they are not going to like him, but it is going to open up a can of worms. He's going to have a book or a Bible published in English and have it mass produced. The 95 Thesis is going to be printed like newspapers, like extra, read all about it, just because Martin Luther wrote about it. And before the printing press, it would have had to spread by word of mouth. All you had to do was kill Martin Luther and whoever he told, and the 95 Thesis would have been forgotten. Lucky for Luther, unlike John Wycliffe and Jan Hus, was the invention of the printing press. All they had to do was kill them and their followers, and it was forgotten. For Martin Luther, he can spread his knowledge and his ideas, and he can go into hiding. He can have the next part written about his problems. He can go back into hiding. They can't really find him. And what's it matter now, because the can of worms has been opened. Literacy rates are going to improve tremendously. We're going to go from like 1 in 1,000 people being able to read and write to about 1 in 100 people being able to read and write. Still not great, but 10 times better than it was before. Let's see, and then it's gonna open up a can of worms to new religions. So Martin Luther, pretty much a Catholic that denies the Pope. The next guy on our list is going to be John Calvin. There's a lot of Calvinists. A lot of Calvinists today are people like Mennonites, Amish. He is a very strict guy, and he's going to lead a Protestant village. He opens up a village, puts walls up, doesn't let the French Catholic government in. He blocks them out. This is going to be John Calvin. His big idea is predestination. If you look at that word, pre just means before, and destination. So before destination, what would that mean in terms of Christianity? He just says that you know where you're going, or God knows where you're going before you're even born. God knows everything. He knows the hairs on our head, right? That is what is said. So he is going to say that God knows everything. So before we're even born, he already knows if we're going to heaven or hell. He already knows if we're going to be forgiven of our sins, get baptized, get involved in church. He knows if we're going to do it or if we're not. There's nothing we can do in our lives. So he kind of gives more of a hopeless point of view in Protestant Christianity. Either you're meant to go to heaven or you're not. You're not going to change to get on that path. God already knows what path you're on before you're even born. God is all-knowing, and that comes from several of our Protestant churches around here today. He says you should have a strong work ethic, and he expands the Protestant movement into France. So these are our two main Protestant members. We have to talk about our members in England, but these are our mainland Protestants. These princes that keep Martin Luther, they are going to adopt Protestantism not because they like the Protestant Christianity, it's because they hate Charles V that controls them. They want to take their own power. Let's look at the Holy Roman Empire. I will show you how complex this is. All right. Each little color is a different prince's kingdom. The Holy Roman Empire, all this border is one country technically owned by Charles V. Also, Spain and Portugal's kind of included in the mix, and the New World. Spain, Mexico, or New Spain, Mexico, Colombia, down into Chile, Peru. All of that is going to be part of this as well. The Habsburgs are the family, and that is going to be the prince's little kingdoms. You see yellow, you see these little dots of red. These princes protect Martin Luther and adopt Protestantism, not because they like what he says, but it gets them away from answering to the Pope and Charles V. Let's look at Charles V real quick. He is part of the Habsburg dynasty, which is a group that believe they should marry their brothers and sisters to keep their bloodline pure. He has that famous Habsburg jaw, a long line of incest. This is definitely not the best painting of him. I think if that was me, I'd be pretty upset that was published about me. But we'll talk about Charles V and the Pope and how they're going to deal with the 30 Years' War in our next video, okay? So we'll start with part 2 very soon.